We'll wait another minute or so. But it's nice when we first come, whether you're here in person or online, to just, it's almost a meditation on sounds, but it's also just a way of appreciating the community because we hear people coming in, we hear people adjusting. Even those of you online can hear what's going on in the room and this room and hear what's going on in your room. And opening to hearing is a way of joining the world. Like when we're lost in our thoughts, there's a kind of insular experience to that. But when we are aware of the sounds, the ambient sounds around us, it's just a way of joining the world. So that's a nice thing to do at the beginning of any program, but especially when you come to Common Ground and there's a few minutes before we begin. Get in your meditation posture and just cultivate that receptive opening to the experience of hearing. Oh yeah, hearing is like this. So just for another minute or so. Just the buzz of life around us, in us. So thank you for coming, everyone. Let's get started. And we begin usually on Sunday mornings with about a 35-minute sit meditation period. So if you haven't already, just settling into comfortable posture, feeling at home in the body just as it is. And for many of us, or the common experience, is just that sense of vulnerability or exposure to what's moving in our own body, what's moving around us, what's moving in the mind that thinks and imagines. And exploring the possibility of relaxing, not the heart, not dependent on any stance. So both the body and the mind, we allow it to be soft, vulnerable. It's really a brave thing to do. Feeling what we feel, whatever's moving internally, externally. So in a sense, we're relearning or learning for the first time maybe to fully inhabit, to fully embody our life in this moment as it actually is. We don't have to explain anything to ourselves or define it, just expressing this willingness to feel what we're feeling, to be receptive and open. And it can be helpful, especially for some of you, some of us, to imagine this receptivity, this opening this allowing as a act of courage. And we'll have probably many impulses for the thinking mind to go to familiar territory, to worry about the things we worry about or plan what we tend to plan and compare, and just all those common mental activities that the thinking mind falls back to. It's like this habit of filling up the space, getting lost in thought. So now we're cultivating a new taste, a taste for being present, being open, being vulnerable, starting with how we relate with the body, the sitting body, the breathing body here, just as it is. Can we relate with kindness and interest, willing to be sensitive, even intimate with the way it is? Sitting is like this. And even more specifically, feeling that rhythm of breathing in, breathing out, however that is for you. It's not the habit of the mind to pay attention to ordinary phenomena like breathing in and breathing out. So it's a radical thing to train the heart to attend to something so ordinary as breathing in from the beginning to the end of a single breath, from the beginning of the out breath all the way to the end. To cultivate this unwavering, kind, clear presence with something ordinary, like the breath or more generally, the experience of the body sitting or hearing. And to do so requires that the mind abandon all of its usual activities of worrying and planning and imagining and problem solving. That's what makes it such a radical training. And be willing to begin again and again. So we're committing to the practice of being open. And if we use the breath, and that's just a specific way to train the heart to be open to the way it is. So we're valuing openness versus being lost in thought. We're developing a taste for being open, present. And you'll notice it has a quality of softness and receptivity. It has the quality of interest and humility. It has the quality of kindness and patience. And of course, we're going to bump into resistance, a voice in the mind that says, this isn't enough, I'm not doing it right. Some kind of doubt or some kind of rejection, resistance. So we just notice that resistance. We feel what it feels like. It's just part of all that's moving in the present moment. So we can even be open to the mind's resistance as just another phenomena being felt, being known. We don't have to get seduced or sucked in. It's a very powerful moment when we've been lost in thought, and then the practice emerges and there's that recognition that I've been lost in thought. That's a powerful place to remember to be open, to feel whatever it feels like to have been lost in thought without trying to control, without needing to judge. The real spiritual art of landing back in the present moment, or re-recognizing that it's like this now, feels like this now. Can this be okay, that it's like this now? And now for the last couple minutes, remembering that the practice is about freedom with conditions as they are. So if we're interested in being free and peaceful, then we practice being free and peaceful with the conditions as they are, the bodily conditions, the mental, emotional conditions that are present, the qualities that we're sensitive to in the room, sounds and sights. So in this way we learn for ourselves what's onward leading toward peace and ease and freedom, and what's onward leading toward stress, being tight and heavy. What way of being, what way of relating now has this flavor of freedom and ease? When the conditions are like they are right now, what is the wise, compassionate way to be relating, to be showing up? So let's take a minute or so, stretch, adjust, whatever you need to take care of your body. Hey, really good to see everybody. Glad you made it, all of you online, all of you here in the room. Just so you know, we have about 66 people online and maybe about 100 in the room or so. Yeah, and I've been following some of the teachings of Ajahn Chah for these Sunday morning talks. If you're interested in taking a look at this collection of the teachings of Ajahn Chah, for those of you online, I put it in the chat there. You can open that up. It has the link. You can either listen to Ajahn Amaro, a British monk, reading the different chapters that have been transcribed from talks Ajahn Chah gave back in Thailand. He was a Thai Buddhist monk and meditation teacher who died in the early 90s, quite influential, quite famous in Thailand. And for those here in the room, if you want to get hold of that document, just go to the public calendar, look for the Sunday morning program. You'll see the link for this Google Doc there. And has some excerpts from each of the chapters that I'm covering, and also the link to get a hold. You can download the digital book if you want. You can even write the monastery and they'll send you a paper book, a real book, if you want, for free. They just because of people have funded the printing of the books for distribution. And this chapter now, chapter 7, has this sort of bold statement: "It can be done," and it helped me reflect as I was thinking about that this week. That our life and our practice, spiritual practice, it has both a receptive and an assertive quality. And it's really important just generally to figure out how am I going to inhabit, how can my life embody both the receptive and the assertive. And sometimes, we use the words masculine and feminine, but it isn't about gender. It's really about qualities, human qualities that all of us, regardless of how we identify, regardless of how we were born, we need to sense and learn, like, what does receptivity look like when my body is like this, or my life is like this, or my cultural conditioning is like this? How can I understand and you find a way to usefully express receptivity? And it's the same with assertiveness. How can this life express assertiveness in a skillful way? What would that look like in my life with this, cultural situation that I embody as a male, as a straight male? What is wholesome assertiveness like? What is wholesome receptivity like? And how does it inform my spiritual practice? And so, like, when we sit, if you put aside 30, 40 minutes, an hour in the morning, whatever you have, 10 minutes, you can think of it that way, like, to really meet the moment in a skillful way, to open and to support this unfolding of our path, spiritual path of insight. We're seeing what we haven't seen before about the nature of our mind, the nature of experience. So that's why here in the West, this tradition of early Buddhism, those of us who are interested in this person who lived 2,500 years ago and what he taught, we call it often insight meditation or vipassana meditation. You maybe heard those words. But it's really pointing to this moment where the mind sees or understands what it hasn't seen or understood before. We have these kind of more ordinary insights all the time, about cooking or about interacting with another person. Oh yeah, when I'm interacting with this person, don't act in that way because it triggers them. That's an insight. It's like, here I've been interacting with that person for 10 years, falling in that hole over and over again with them, and now I kind of get it. Oh, this doesn't work with them. Or it doesn't work to put lemon in this dish. So glad to see that. Don't mix lemon and milk or something like that. And then it's like once the mind sees, understands, then it doesn't easily forget. It makes an impression. And this happens in a deeper level too with insight. Once we see something about the nature of the mind, like, the example that's often used in Buddhist practice, because it's so life-changing, is when we do the work of stabilizing present moment awareness, which allows the mind to observe all of our mental, emotional conditioning, because that doesn't go away just because we're developing the practice, right? We see the tendencies of our mind to worry, to judge, to have self-doubt, to have even self-hatred. I mean, all the patterns, to have shame, to think we're better than others, right? All those patterns are there, but now they're there with the stability of present moment awareness that just sees it as it is. Oh. If we verbalize what's going on in our sits, when having a good sit, there'd be a lot of that, oh, that's how it is. Oh, how interesting, amazing. In Tibetan Buddhism, they have this phrase, maybe you've seen it, those of you who've studied in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, Ema Ho. I'm guessing that's Tibetan, but I'm not sure if that's Sanskrit or Tibetan, but it gets translated as how amazing. How amazing, right? And that's kind of the emotional response to insight. Oh, how amazing. It's like this. This is the way it is. And those moments of insight have a particular flavor, the Buddha says, a distinct flavor, the flavor of liberation or the flavor of freedom. And it's very distinct. It's not an idea. It's just to make it more earthy, it's a visceral kind of experience where energetically we're holding a 50-pound backpack and there's an insight and some of that weight just goes away. But previous to the insight, we didn't know we were carrying a heavy load. And then all of a sudden the mind realizes the abandoning or the dropping of that load. So that's what a spiritual insight is. And it's, as one of my teachers says, a wonderful Burmese teacher, Sayadaw U Tejaniya, he says, insights are always surprising. That's one of the characteristics. It's like, you might have been studying this stuff for a long time, but when a real spiritual insight happens, it shocks. Oh, that's really true. Things really are empty of a permanent self, right? So if we see like just a normal insight would be, we're just sitting there and we're watching a lot of, we're with the breath, we're with the sensations of sitting, with the present moment experience of hearing, some stability, continuity of present moment awareness, right? So there's some momentum. And in the context of having that continuity of present moment awareness, we see a lot of the mental conditioning playing out. So thoughts will arise and then they'll cease, and a wave of emotion will come and it will cease, and another thought, right? So in the context of being with the body or being with the breath, there's a lot of activity. Have you noticed? That's a sign of good practice, is when you realize if you pretend that there isn't that activity, there's still that activity, but you're just pretending it isn't there. That's called delusion. A more skilled practitioner feels some tranquility, not because that activity is gone, but because the mind has this wisdom that allows the activity of the present moment to be the activity of the present moment. Isn't afraid of it. Isn't trying, it's like going outside and trying to control the wind. It's not going to work. And the mind, that conditioned mind, that mind that's habit bound, is a lot like wind. All the different currents of wind, meaning it's a natural process, a very complex natural process. And delusion looks like thinking, I'm doing those thoughts, I'm doing those emotions. No, there are thoughts, there are emotions, but are you actually back there doing them in any real way, permanent sense? Did you find that guy who's doing it? No. But yet we certainly can be aware of the mental activity happening ceaselessly, right? And then when we have that stability of present moment awareness, there's just the observation, the clarity. Oh, just like observing the sound. I don't know if you hear, but the credit union next door has a flagpole, and there's some metal thing. It's beautiful. It's like Tibetan bells, our own version. And just the different play of sounds. And when we like to sit, generally people like to sit outside when it's warm enough, because you get the sound of the wind, you get the sound of the flagpole and the metal hitting the pole and traffic, and there's something beautiful about the totality, right? The sort of buzz of life, would be sort of a common English phrase for that. But right with that can be a sense of belonging, like that this internal buzz is not so different than the external buzz. It's all one buzz, one catastrophe. I don't know if people know this about this book. John Kabat-Zinn, who started mindfulness-based stress reduction, maybe 30, 40 years ago. It's quite famous, this whole program of stress reduction. You find it in most hospitals and clinics now. And but his book that described that program he developed at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center, he called it Full Catastrophe Living. It's such a brilliant title because it acknowledges the truth that when we open, it is a full catastrophe, right? It's just like all of this internal and external stuff is unfolding according to the innumerable causes and conditions. It's very alive. And in a funny way, intelligent, but there's no center to the intelligence. That's part of the insight. And so the more that we create a mind that can open with some balance and stability, the more we see that it's empty. That's a Buddhist term, right? It's empty, or I'm using it in a Buddhist way, it's empty of referring back to a distinct and permanent me. And that's an insight we have about nature, the nature of our mind, internal, external. It doesn't matter, because whether we're observing the cacophony of sound, or the activity of light through the leaves, or the play of thought and emotion moving through our bodies, we have the same insight, that it's empty of referring back to any sort of set or fixed thing. Me, you, this, that. There is all this activity, but there's no control center anywhere. No you or me anywhere. It's just activity playing out lawfully. And that, we can understand it intellectually, hopefully, but to directly experience that changes us. Because what it changes is the habit of fixing on, believing in that habit of being a somebody back there somewhere. And all of what we call unskillful, like greed, and all the different expressions of greed, and hatred, and aversion, and fear, and all of the different expressions of, the opposite of greed, aversion, and delusion, disconnection, distraction, denial, all of those, spectrum of being unskillful depend on that wrong understanding of a permanent me back there, as opposed to this activity of nature that is empty of any kind of fixed or set or permanent I, me, or mine. And you could become the world's expert on that intellectually, and your life won't be transformed. Or you could have no clue of this intellectual end of the teaching, but have that experience, direct insight, and your life will be changed. So we just want to study it enough or hear it enough so we're actually interested in doing the practice, because that's what actually changes us. And as I suggested at the beginning of the guided meditation, we're really doing the practice because there is this taste of freedom. It's a little different than some of the attitudes, because mindfulness gets used in a lot of ways. As I mentioned, it's out there a lot now as a stress reduction technique, and it works on that level. Nothing wrong with it being taught on that level. But that's not what the Buddha wasn't teaching stress reduction. He was teaching this radical, this possibility of radical freedom with conditions. However difficult, challenging the conditions of anybody's human life might be, he suggests, the practice suggests that there's freedom. The heart can be released and unburdened, even with difficult circumstances. That doesn't mean that there won't be pain. Pain comes with life, the sort of endless play of pain and pleasure. The Buddha calls this the vicissitudes of life: gain and loss, pleasure and pain, fame and disrepute, praise and blame. Just the kind of mapping out how everybody's life is in this dynamic of gain and loss, pleasure and pain, fame and disrepute. Your kids love you, and then pretty soon they hate you, or having to do with you, and then they love you again, and then same with our cats and dogs. And it's like when we lay down the law, the cat doesn't like it. and when we indulge the cat loves it. And it's just this way, it's just, so our life is to not depend on that play, which is you call that a normal approach to life, is to avoid the loss and to emphasize the gain, to avoid the insults and emphasize the praise, to avoid the disrepute and to emphasize the fame. And the trouble is we never get out of that dynamic. I mean, it's not the same for each of us, of course. I'm not claiming that. But even the people we might imagine as being most privileged or most fortunate, they're still in that gain and loss, pleasure and pain, fame and disrepute. We see it all the time. People who seem to have everything and then they have the big crash, have further to fall, right? Because they were seen as being so special, and then somebody realizes that they poop too, and or that they're a confused sexual being, or they're someone who has issues around power or whatever it might be. And it's just that people who have a lot of power and privilege, it just seems more dramatic because they have more power and privilege. So when they express their humanity, they're expressing it through all that power and privilege, which makes it messier, and causes more harm for those around them. But we all have this sort of dynamic that we have to deal with. So what does freedom feel like and look like when we're human beings? And as I said, I think right at the beginning, what can be useful, both in stabilizing present moment awareness and really supporting the deepening of insight, is getting to know receptivity and assertiveness in the spiritual sense. Like, how can we have that, more traditionally assertive quality of fearlessness and steadfastness and resoluteness? What does that look like in our spiritual lives in a way that we find trustworthy? And for others, it will be more challenging to get to know the receptive, yielding, humility, patience, tenderness, sensitivity. And how can they work together as friends instead of being like, well, you got to choose one or the other? How do we bring them together and see them moving and supporting our life and our practice? And I think Ajahn Chah does a nice job of talking about this in this chapter 7, if you want to take a look. And I mentioned in that document, I have some of the excerpts too from the chapter. First thing I wanted to share, one of the things I wanted to share is this, just in the tradition, it said that after the Buddha's awakening, his deep insight, he practiced, he was 29 when he left his householder life and became a wandering ascetic, and then 35 when he had his deep insight, so about 6 years of practicing in the forests in northern India. And then after the deep insight, he just sort of stayed in the area for, I think it was like 45 days or something like that. And at some point, just understanding the availability. And this is an act of faith for all of us, even to hear it and to be willing to keep an open mind. But he said something like, wide open are the gates to the deathless. And deathless is a synonym for freedom, for awakening, for liberation. Wide open, fully available for those who have confidence to listen, to look, to open. And to be truthful, a lot of what is dominant in our minds is this sort of arrogant certainty that there ain't no freedom here. I'm tied to my job, or I've got this body that's aging, or I live at a time where there's just so much ignorance in our culture, or we have all of these sort of things we can point to that make the mind certain that some version of I'm screwed, or we're all screwed, right? And it's not like there isn't some truth to the statement that I often will say, that it's not easy being a human being. Obviously, that's true. It's not easy. It's not easy being a human being when all of this seems very personal. All of the misery and all of the unfairness, the injustice, and all of the uncertainty and insecurity. When that is seen through this lens of taking things very personally, it's really hard being human. So this wide open are the gates to the deathless for those who have confidence, who have faith to listen, to look, to open. That's the thing about any authentic spiritual path. It's like we actually have to walk the path. It can't be given to us. Whatever awakening is or liberation is, it's not something, at least in the sort of early Buddhist understanding, it isn't something that can be given. Like if only, we had a fully awakened being here to show us the way or something like that. There's this whole later development in Buddhism, Pure Land Buddhism, and it really was endemic even in the early Buddhist tradition, Theravada Buddhism, like in Thailand and Burma, Sri Lanka and other, Cambodia, Laos. This very common kind of cultural understanding in these Buddhist cultures that, hey, we're not going to awaken in this lifetime, so better to set in motion, future conditions in a future birth, that maybe I can do it then. And then one of the schools of Buddhism developed in China and other places in that area, Pure Land Buddhism, was really just totally fixated on a future Buddha and being born at a time of a future Buddha, Maitreya. And so there's all kinds of like seemingly skillful ways of putting off, like, oh, I can't, I'm so ignorant, or I'm so caught in the world, or I'm so, I'm restless, or I'm whatever. I started too late in life, I'm too old, my body hurts when I sit. We just have all these ideas that kind of give us an excuse not to be interested in freedom now. And there's that proverb or adage that if we don't find what we don't look for. So if we have this, idea, even if we don't say it out loud, but we have this idea that freedom isn't available for me. I mean, real spiritual release, opening isn't available for me in my life. I just want a little relief so I can do my life a little better. Which is, obviously that's a relatively wholesome thing to be thinking in the great scheme of things. But why can't we keep at least a sliver of humility, like, well, maybe real release, opening, the expression of wisdom and compassion in a profound way is actually available in this life with the conditions that I have in my life. This is the great thing about seeing different teachers and just hearing about different people who seem to have a lot of saintly qualities, is that the advantage or the purpose of really, like when I grew up as a Catholic, and I had a pretty good experience as a Catholic, I have to say, until my mid-teens, and realized, a lot of my questions weren't being answered, so I moved on. But one of the things I liked as a kid was, what was it called, like the Lives of the Saints? It's a pretty big book. And it's just kind of neat to see like completely different circumstances. Some were from rich families, some from poor families. Some had hardship, some not. Some had these qualities or those qualities. But to get the sense that however we understand spiritual awakening or freedom, that it seems to be available. And the real question, because ultimately the Buddha taught in a very pragmatic way. The real question is it functional to imagine that freedom is available? Is it helpful to imagine that? It's not about even whether freedom is available or not. If I live my life as if freedom is available, what is the effect of that? If I live my life as if freedom is not available, what is the effect of that? And a lot of the time, honestly, right, we're living as if, same old, same old. And we don't open to the possibility. We don't, in a sense, listen. Like, listen to what's here and now. We're not intuitively interested in freedom, here and now. There's this passage from the chapter I wanted to read. This is from that chapter 7, It Can Be Done. Ajahn Chah, he didn't write the book, that was just the transcription of some of his talks from the 70s and 80s mostly. In this way, we can dwell in a natural state, which is peace and tranquility. If we are criticized, we remain undisturbed. If we are praised, we are undisturbed. Let things be in this way. Don't be influenced by others. This is freedom. Knowing the two extremes for what they are, one can experience well-being. The two extremes meaning happiness and unhappiness. Knowing the two extremes for what they are, one can experience well-being. One does not stop at either side, right? One does not get identified to happiness or unhappiness. This is genuine happiness and peace, transcending all things of the world. So we're transcending the attachment. We're not transcending the world, so to speak. We're transcending the wrong understanding of our worldly experience. In the world, but not of the world, not caught by it. There's a little bit more here. One transcends all good and evil. One is above cause and effect, beyond birth and death. But of course, the lawfulness of nature continues. Birth and death continues with awakening, right? The Buddha died. His body fell apart after he was around 80 or so when he died. So, but the understanding, it's not even the mind itself, it's understanding isn't imagining anything other than this activity of nature. So it's hard to talk about in words, but we're just aligning with reality. And that's a nice sort of way to practice, like when in our daily sit. I'm sitting down, I'm stabilizing present moment awareness with the purpose of aligning with the way it is. It's like, when if you've got a lot of stringed instruments and you pluck one of the strings, the other strings start to sympathetically resonate, right? And you can even, weird things can happen. The fridge can start buzzing, and you might notice other things that are a little loose start to sympathetically vibrate because the fridge is buzzing, right? And it's a little bit like that. We're creating this sort of profound quality of openness. Openness, we don't want to underestimate how much habit energy we have that is not supportive of being open. Right? Just all the little and bigger ways our mind gets fixated and obsessed and got to solve this problem, and even when we're practicing, and even when the thinking mind is all about practice, it's also separating from the present moment. We're abstracting the me who's practicing in a way that isn't really intimate, isn't really open. But we're creating this profound ability to be open, so one's understanding, the way I understand things, the way I connect and relate, is in alignment with the way it is. In a way, all of the dukkha, all of the suffering, all of the oppression is because one's heart, collectively, our heart, our understanding isn't in line with the moment, the way it is. And that dissonance is the fuel for greed, hatred, and delusion. And the simple way of talking about that is because there's this arrogant presumption of separation and self that is somehow distinct and outside of nature, relating to nature, well, that's an abomination to imagine that there's me outside of nature observing nature. That's not actually what's happening. And when we live that way, then we get a world like this, which is a lot of unnecessary suffering. So when we sit, it's like if we are interested in freedom and peace and release, then we use that stability of presence, of openness, of being with the way it is, to align. And so we have to deeply listen, intuitively feel and open in order that every part of the mind, including one's understanding, begins to align with just the truth of the moment. But it's not cognitive. It's not like we got to figure this out intellectually. It's really more, for lack of a better way of saying it, on this vibrational level. Because we've been swimming in the truth of things from day one, right? It's like the reality of the present moment is always here. So it's not like we need a special moment. But what also is here are all of our habits of our arrogant certainty and our wrong ideas about what's here. And that creates the dissonance, and the dissonance is what fuels our patterns of greed, hatred, and delusion, like I said. And on, and on, and on. And these are, like in Buddhist terms, are called the cycles of suffering, or samsara. You maybe heard that word. I think there's even a perfume now called samsara, which is the height of irony. But just like there are restaurants called craving, things like that. Let me just end with this beautiful passage. This is from Ajahn Sushito. He's a Western monk, a British monk, and he's been a monk now for over 40 years. And he's also in the tradition of Ajahn Chah. He's a student of Ajahn Chah. Really wonderful teacher. He has a lot online you can listen to. And this is this little essay he wrote called Original Openness. Openness, then, is a careful practice rather than an ideology that insists on openness to all people at all times. Right? So we don't want to turn our practice into an idea that we believe in. I believe in openness. And we impose that on ourselves and on others. It's really a pointer, really, a practice. And he says a careful practice. And then he goes on, misplaced faith and openness or trust that isn't backed up by a meaningful assessment of what you're putting your faith in is subject to being abused. What is always skillful, however, is to be open to yourself about what's happening to you in the here and now, and checking it out in your body and heart. Maybe there was a threat, but that's past. Maybe you've reached the edge of your capacity to be open and accepting of another. Then something has to be said to let them know that. Thus you replace a pathology with a wise navigation. This wise openness naturally supports application energy, right? Just doing what's next. When there's that inner balance, we're naturally curious and empathetic. We move into our environment in a positive way. But that's how you wake up. Life is most alive when you can be present at the edge of the unknown. And if there's one way in which the property of the deathless can be experienced right now, it's in the ability to living free of the heart's contraction of fear, depression, by holding on and holding on that comes with the loss of the known. Death, separation, uncertainty, they're all part of life. The Buddhist teaching is that we have the original potential to handle and, in fact, to blossom in the face of these. We don't have to feel threatened, anxious, needy, or inadequate. With wise openness, the main causes and conditions for human misery cease. And that's really the flavor of insight. I mentioned that one characteristic is being surprised when the mind sees or understands something it hasn't seen or understood before. But the other characteristic is that taste of freedom, that heart being burdened and that burden being released to some degree. And the sort of subject to senses, that felt right. This is in the right direction. This is what this human life is all about, putting down the load. But we can't, from this egoic point of view, put down the load. We have to do this work of opening to the reality of the present moment. And it's that opening process itself that leads to the letting go. And that's really important because a lot of people, just in ordinary levels, we can hate ourselves because we know we should let go of something. We're obsessing about something that we should let go of, but we don't. So then on top of the pain of being obsessed about something that's not helpful, we hate ourselves for being obsessed about something that's not helpful. And so instead of that self-centered control, I'm going to get in control of my life and do the right thing, that doesn't really work. And a lot of the religious fundamentalists that can cause so much hatred and divisiveness and war throughout history is really this overuse of belief in something instead of the actual spiritual practice, which is about aligning with the truth. In other contexts, like a Christian context, aligning with the divine. But it's not about belief, fixing the mind in a way. It's really about this openness. So I'll leave it here. And as always, we'll have small groups both online and here if you want. These are always optional, but it's just a chance for you to meet members of the community. But before that, I'll just mention a few things coming up. And first, just encouraging people who feel part of the community to get on the weekly email list. Somewhere on our website, you can sign up for the weekly email list. Otherwise, just send the center an email, and we'll put you on that email list. We send out one email a week, just with program updates. So this coming Saturday, Kamala Masters, a long-time teacher in our community, somebody I teach with sometimes, but also back in the day was a teacher of mine, is going to be teaching Saturday night. Kamala is teaching the TCVC retreat. This is a sister organization to Common Ground. They organize some retreats in town. Twin Cities Vipassana Collective, it's called. And Kamala is teaching that retreat, but they'll be done on Friday, and on Saturday night she'll be here in this room teaching. I believe it's also on Zoom. And then that same day, Saturday the 15th, is going to be a work day from 9:30 to 1, doing deeper cleaning and fixing the building. We have a great building committee that have been really doing a great job taking care of our center here. So you can join them. There's usually social time and lunch offered to everyone who comes. So anybody's welcome. You can sign up for that online. And similarly, with our retreat center out in Wisconsin, Corey Clemenson, our main maintenance person and the guy who did most of the building of our retreat center, he usually gets out there a couple weeks every summer and does a work retreat. So it's the 28th of June through July 5th, and the 9th of August through the 15th. So if you want to get out to the retreat center, this is a more social time to be out there because you're working with people. They still have a few sits every day. Usually listen to Dharma talk in the evenings, but put in several hours of work at the retreat center. And you can go out for a couple days or longer, depending on what works in your life. Lots of other things coming up. Just get check the calendar or get yourself on that weekly email. So really nice to be with everybody. Thanks for coming. And stay if you want to be in a small group. Tom will help organize groups of 3 or 4 in this room. People online, just hang in there and I'll divide you into small groups in about 2 minutes. Thanks, everyone.